Elena stood by our father's casket, adjusting her black veil, and quietly handed me a cease and desist letter before the priest had even finished the eulogy. I didn't cry. I took action. 72 hours later, her entire financial world collapsed and she never saw it coming. To understand how we ended up standing over an open grave with legal documents, you have to understand the architecture of my family. In the grand museum of our childhood, Elena was the masterpiece, and I was the climate control system. She was the one meant to be admired, the beautiful, chaotic hurricane who always needed rescuing. I was the one who kept the temperature stable, working quietly in the background, ensuring nothing cracked or decayed. My father was a good man, but he was a terrible architect of boundaries. He built his entire life around appeasing Elena's storms. When she dropped out of college, he paid her rent. When she crashed her car, he bought her a new one. And when I graduated with honors, he clapped politely before taking a phone call because Elena was having a crisis with her boyfriend. I learned very early that in our household, peace was not the absence of conflict. Peace was simply the act of giving Elena whatever she wanted before she had the chance to scream for it. But gravity eventually comes for us all, and it came for my father in the form of stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis fell on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I had moved my entire life, my remote job, my dog, my boxes of files into his guest room in San Diego. The house, a sprawling mid-century property overlooking the canyon, was filled with the heavy, sterile scent of impending loss. For 8 months, that house became my entire universe. I learned how to flush pick lines. I learned how to measure liquid morphine down to the decimal. I learned the exact angle to adjust the pillows so he wouldn't wake up choking in the middle of the night. Where was the masterpiece while the museum was burning down? Elena lived 40 minutes away. She visited 3 times in 8 months. Each visit followed the exact same choreography. She would sweep through the front door, wearing expensive perfume that made my father nauseous, hold his hand just long enough to take a tragic, tear-stained selfie for her social media, and then retreat to the kitchen to ask me about his life insurance policies. "You know, Clara," she whispered during her second visit, swirling a glass of his expensive Cabernet. "Dad promised me this house years ago. We talked about it. It's only fair, considering I'm the eldest and I have the kids." My blood ran cold. He was dying in the next room, his breaths rattling like dry leaves, and she was already measuring the drapes. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just nodded and went back to organizing his medication. What Elena didn't know, what she fundamentally failed to understand about the climate control system, is that when you spend your whole life managing the background, you learn exactly how the machinery of the house works. You see the cracks. You see the foundation. And most importantly, you see the bank statements. If you are listening to this and something feels familiar, if you have ever felt like the invisible child in your own family, you need to understand the psychological trap you are in. It is called the golden child and scapegoat dynamic, and it is designed to use your empathy as a weapon against you. The system relies on the scapegoat feeling guilt for the family's dysfunction, while the golden child feels entitled to the family's resources. You might think that if you just love them enough, if you just sacrifice enough, they will finally see your worth. They won't. Stop waiting for an apology that will never arrive. The exit is not forgiveness. The exit is radical, unshakable boundaries. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you, and keeping the peace is just a polite name for slow self-destruction. In the final weeks, my father's mind remained sharp even as his body surrendered. He saw the empty chairs where Elena should have been. He heard the silence from her end of the phone. And one quiet evening, as I was reading him the newspaper, he reached out, gripped my wrist with surprising strength, and asked me to call his lawyer. What I'm about to tell you is the part I almost left out. But you need to hear it. That was the setup. Now here is where I stopped being patient and started being precise. The morning after my father asked me to call his lawyer, I sat at the kitchen island with a yellow legal pad. I didn't call Mr. Sterling immediately. First, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. I logged into my father's primary bank accounts. I was his designated power of attorney, a legal document Elena had laughed at years ago, claiming she was too busy with her own life to handle his boring administrative tasks. That boring administrative task gave me full visibility. and what I saw made my blood run cold. Over the past 3 months, there had been a series of strange withdrawals from his secondary checking account. Small testing amounts, $200 on a Tuesday, $500 on a Friday, then a massive red flag, a failed wire transfer attempt for $12,000, flagged by the fraud department. The IP address originated directly from Elena's zip code. She wasn't just measuring the drapes. She was trying to empty the vault before the owner had even passed. I didn't call her. I didn't scream. I printed the ledger, placed it in a secure folder, and called Mr. Sterling. He arrived the next afternoon. Mr. Sterling was a meticulous man who had represented our family business for decades. My father, frail but fiercely lucid, looked at him and said, "I need to protect Clara, and I need to protect the house from Elena." We reviewed the existing estate plan. The old will, drafted in 2014, divided everything 50-50. But as Mr. Sterling explained, a will is just a piece of paper that tells a probate court what you want. It still has to go through the slow, public probate process in California. Elena could tie it up in litigation for years. We don't update the will, Mr. Sterling advised. We bypass it entirely. We build a fortress. We establish a revocable living trust. By placing the house and the assets directly into a trust, my father would technically no longer own them upon his death. The trust would own them, and as the sole named trustee, I would assume immediate, uncontested control the second his heart stopped beating. No probate court. No room for Elena to contest. The 2014 will would become useless. We moved quickly, but not flawlessly. I wish I could say it was a cinematic montage of signing papers, but reality is messier. Mr. Sterling's notary was delayed in Southern California traffic. She arrived 2 hours late. By then, my father's pain had spiked. We had to wait an agonizing 3 hours for his medication to settle, so we could legally sign his name. His hand shook so violently that he tore the parchment paper on the first attempt, but on the second try, the signature held. The house was transferred. The lock clicked shut. If you are listening to this, pay close attention. A paper trail is not just a folder of receipts you shove in a drawer. A true paper trail is a legally established timeline of intent. When you are dealing with someone who feels entitled to what is yours, verbal agreements mean absolutely nothing. Financial abuse is still abuse and it leaves evidence. Do not wait for a conflict to erupt before you start documenting. A document signed, notarized, and filed before the war begins is your ultimate form of self-preservation. You secure the fortress while it is quiet, so when they finally bring their battering rams, they are hitting solid steel. The timing of our legal maneuver was immaculate. Exactly 1 week later, Elena's audacity reached a new peak. It was a Sunday evening. The hospice nurse had just warned me we were entering the final transition phase. I was sitting by his bed when my phone vibrated. A text from Elena. "Hey Clara," it read. "Met with a contractor friend. He says we can tear down the wall between the kitchen and dining room to open up the floor plan. I want to start renovations the week after Dad passes, so we can list it by spring. Start packing up your room, okay? I'll need that space for equipment." She wasn't just planning the funeral. She was actively managing the demolition of the house I was living in with our dying father in the next room. I kept my voice steady, though no one was there to hear me. I simply took a screenshot and uploaded it to my encrypted drive. 4 days later, at 3:14 a.m. on a Thursday, my father took his quiet last breath. The room went dead silent. I sat with him for a long time, holding his cold hand, just the two of us, before calling the hospice team and the funeral home. I called Elena at 6 p.m. She didn't answer. I left a voicemail. She texted back, "I'm so devastated. I'll handle the funeral arrangements. Don't worry about paying for anything. We will just use Dad's checking account." I let out a short, humorless laugh. I already knew she would try that. What she didn't know was that upon presenting the death certificate, my father's individual accounts were immediately frozen. The trust accounts which she had zero access to remained under my control. She was walking into a trap, carrying the rope herself. The funeral was scheduled for Wednesday. Elena insisted on handling the guest list, the floral arrangements, and the eulogy. She wanted an audience. She wanted to play the grieving, dutiful eldest daughter who had heroically stepped up to manage the estate. I let her. What I found inside my mailbox 2 days before that funeral changed everything I thought I knew about her level of desperation. It was a thick, manila envelope from a law firm I didn't recognize. The return address belonged to a high-end estate litigation attorney in Los Angeles. She hadn't just been measuring the drapes. She had already hired a shark to evict me. For 8 months, I absorbed everything quietly. That ends here. The funeral reception was held at the San Diego house, strictly per my father's final instructions. Elena arrived late, wearing a black designer dress she had undoubtedly purchased just for the occasion. She spent the first hour floating gracefully between clusters of our extended family, dabbing at perfectly dry eyes with a monogrammed tissue, and complaining loudly about the incompetence of my father's bank. They made a clerical error, she sighed dramatically to our Aunt Martha, delicately sipping her wine. Dad's accounts are temporarily frozen because of some automated glitch. It's such a massive headache, but I'm handling it. I always have to handle everything for this family. I stood quietly by the stone fireplace, drinking black coffee, watching the performance unfold. I noticed the exact moment she signaled her intent. The front door opened, and a man in a sharp charcoal suit walked in. He didn't look like family. He looked expensive. Elena immediately broke away from Aunt Martha, linking arms with the man, and began marching directly toward me across the hardwood floor. "Clara, this is Mr. Vance," Elena announced loudly, projecting her voice so that the murmuring in the living room immediately died down. "He is representing me as the executor of Dad's estate under the 2014 will. We know you are grieving, but we need you to vacate the premises by Monday morning so we can prep the house for sale. Here is the formal eviction notice, and I will need the keys to Dad's car before you leave today." I didn't blink. I kept my voice steady. I didn't take the paper from her outstretched hand. "You're holding a dead document, Elena," I said calmly, reaching into my large black tote bag. I pulled out a heavy blue folder and dropped it onto the glass coffee table with a resounding thud. Elena stared at the blue cover, her smug expression faltering for a fraction of a second. She snatched it up, her long acrylic nails scraping against the glass, and flipped rapidly to the first page. "Mr. Vance leaned over her shoulder, his professional detachment vanishing as his trained eyes scanned the dense legal clauses and the fresh, undeniable notary stamps. You could physically see the reality hit her. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking hollow and suddenly very fragile. Her mouth opened and closed twice like a fish out of water before she finally choked out, This is fake. You manipulated him. He promised me the house." The room went dead silent. The aunts and uncles were frozen in place, staring at us with wide eyes. "He promised you 50% of his estate," I replied, my voice carrying perfectly through the silent room. "But the estate currently owns nothing. The trust owns everything. And I am the sole trustee." "Mr. Vance cleared his throat. He gently but firmly pulled the blue folder out of Elena's trembling hands. He read the second page, checked the date of the signature, and smoothly closed it. He looked at me, then at Elena. "Mr. Vance," I said, addressing the lawyer directly, "before you bill her for today's travel expenses from Los Angeles, you should know that her primary checking account is about to bounce. She has been relying on unauthorized, fraudulent transfers from my father's secondary account, which I formally reported to the fraud department yesterday morning. I have the complete paper trail." Mr. Vance didn't argue. Lawyers who bill $500 an hour do not waste their valuable time on clients who cannot pay their retainers. He simply handed the blue folder back to me, picked up his leather briefcase, adjusted his tie, and walked out the front door without saying a single word to his former client. Elena snapped. The carefully curated image of the grieving, capable daughter shattered into a million jagged pieces. She lunged forward, grabbing my arm with sudden, violent force. It wasn't a cinematic struggle. It was ugly and desperate. Her grip was frantic, and her fingernail dug deeply into my skin, breaking the surface and leaving a crescent moon scratch that stung sharply. I shoved her back, hard, almost knocking her into the catering table. "Get out of my house," I said. "Now!" or I am calling the police and having you removed for trespassing and assault." She backed away, breathing heavily, tears of genuine panic finally streaming down her ruined makeup. She looked frantically around the room, seeking an ally, seeking someone to rescue her like they always did. But our relatives simply stared at the floor, suddenly deeply interested in the intricate pattern of the Persian rug. No one stepped forward to save the masterpiece. The museum was permanently closed. Watching her stumble out the front door, crying and humiliated, I understood something fundamental about the architecture of toxic relationships. Boundaries are simply a description of what you will and will not accept in your life. Enforcing them is never an act of cruelty, it is an act of extreme clarity. People who scream the loudest about family loyalty have almost always done the least to earn it. You cannot reason with someone who benefits from misunderstanding you. I locked the heavy oak door behind her. The definitive click of the deadbolt echoed through the silent living room. Aunt Martha eventually stepped forward, silently offering to help me clear the catering plates. The rest of the afternoon passed in a surreal, muted haze. I had won. The house was secure. The finances were locked down tight. My father's final wishes were protected in an impenetrable legal vault that no Los Angeles lawyer could ever crack. But narcissists do not just disappear because you lock a door. They adapt, they mutate, and they look for the absolute weakest point in your remaining armor. I thought I had completely dismantled her power, but what she posted online exactly 12 hours later forced me to burn her remaining reputation to absolute ash. The confrontation was the spark. What came after was the fire. Exactly 12 hours after I locked her out of the house, Elena went nuclear on social media. She didn't just post a vague, passive-aggressive status update. She launched a fully monetized, carefully curated smear campaign. Her post featured a heavily filtered, black and white photograph of her holding our father's hand, the exact selfie she had taken during one of her rare 40-minute visits months ago. The caption was a masterpiece of fiction. "My sister, Clara, manipulated our father in his final, vulnerable days," she wrote. "She locked me out of the house. She denied me the chance to say a proper goodbye. Now she is exploiting a legal loophole to steal the inheritance he promised to my children. The legal fees to fight this elder abuse are astronomical. We are setting up a GoFundMe. Any help to save my kids' future is appreciated." The audacity was breathtaking. She was actively monetizing her own cruelty. Within 3 hours, she had raised just over $4,000 from sympathetic high school acquaintances, distant cousins, and strangers who loved a tragic story. My phone began vibrating relentlessly with confused, angry text messages from relatives demanding to know how I could do something so evil to my grieving sister. Watching her weaponize her tears across the internet, watching my own blood relatives leave supportive comments on a fabricated story, brought me to a critical realization about how toxic systems protect themselves. If you have ever been the target of a narcissist smear campaign, you know the suffocating desperation of wanting to scream the truth from the rooftops. It is a specific form of gaslighting where the abuser recruits a public audience to validate their victimhood. They use your silence as proof of your guilt, and they use your angry reaction as proof of your instability. You might feel an overwhelming urge to defend yourself, to explain your side to every single person who heard the lie. Do not do it. When you argue with a smear campaign, you are participating in the circus they created. The exit strategy is absolute, deafening silence combined with surgical, undeniable proof delivered only to the people who actually matter. Let them perform, you just handle the paperwork. I did not leave a single comment on her post. I did not reply to any of the angry text messages. I let the GoFundMe run for exactly 48 hours to let her build up a false sense of security. Then, I contacted the Trust and Safety Division of the crowdfunding platform. It wasn't a seamless process. The platform's automated system initially rejected my fraud claim because I didn't have a direct link to the specific back-end transactions. I had to sit on hold for an agonizing hour and 20 minutes, listening to cheerful acoustic guitar music before a human representative finally picked up the line. Once I had a real person on the phone, I didn't argue. I simply uploaded the police incident report number regarding the fraudulent bank transfers, the official death certificate, and the legal trust documents proving she was a tempter. to raise funds for an estate she had no legal claim to. The campaign was suspended within 10 minutes. All donations were forcibly refunded. Her digital ATM was abruptly shut down, leaving her with a public error page that clearly stated the campaign had been removed for violating terms of service regarding fraudulent activity. Next, I opened a new email draft. I BCC'd every single relative who had attended the funeral, including the aunts who had offered their silent sympathies to her. The subject line was simply, estate administration and financial disclosures. The email contained exactly 3 sentences. I am writing to clarify the legal administration of our father's estate. Attached, please find the certified trust documentation, alongside the bank fraud department logs detailing the unauthorized withdrawal attempts made from his account in the weeks prior to his passing. I will not be answering further questions on this matter. I attached the PDFs. I compressed the file twice so it wouldn't bounce back from their inboxes. I hit send. The silence that followed was absolute. The family WhatsApp group, usually a constant stream of daily updates and mild gossip, went completely dead. You see, a narcissist's power relies entirely on keeping the evidence hidden and the emotions highly charged. Once you introduce cold, hard data into the environment, the illusion instantly shatters. No one could argue with the IP address logs matching Elena's home network. No one could debate the exact timestamps on the failed $12,000 wire transfer. She had tried to rob a dying man, and now everyone in our bloodline had the receipts downloaded directly to their smartphones. But the most devastating blow didn't come from the extended family. It came from inside her own house. Her husband, Mark, was an accountant. He was a quiet, pragmatic man who had always enabled Elena simply because it was easier than fighting her constant storms. Elena had told him the estate was just temporarily tied up in probate, that I was simply being stubborn, and that the San Diego house would be theirs to sell by spring. Acting on that lie, she had already convinced him to put down a non-refundable $15,000 deposit on a luxury pool installation for their own home, banking on her ending inheritance to cover the massive balance. Mark didn't get the mass email, but his mother did, and his mother forwarded it to him. He called me that Sunday evening. It was the first time in 5 years he had ever dialed my personal number. His voice wasn't angry, it was entirely hollow. Clara, he said softly, the background noise of his house eerily quiet. Elena told me the failed wire transfer was just a technical mistake by the bank. She said you had agreed to loan us that money for the kids' private school tuition. I didn't, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly steady. And the tuition is due in 2 weeks, isn't it? A heavy sigh echoed through the receiver. We don't have it, Clara. She spent our savings paying off the credit card she maxed out buying designer furniture for a house we are never getting. I didn't offer him a loan. I didn't offer him pity. I simply told him he should thoroughly check his joint accounts, and I hung up the phone. I didn't know it then, but the fallout from that email was just the opening tremor. Elena thought the loss of the house was the absolute worst consequence of her actions, and that public embarrassment was the deepest wound I could inflict. But she was about to find out that while family might eventually forgive a lie, the financial institutions of California do not forgive wire fraud across state lines. When you attempt to transfer $12,000 out of a dying man's checking account using his stolen digital credentials, you are not just acting out a petty sibling rivalry. You are committing a federal crime. And when you execute that transfer across state lines, or through a federally insured banking portal, you trigger automated, unfeeling legal mechanisms that no amount of crying can untrigger. 3 weeks after the catastrophic funeral reception, Elena received a formal knock on her front door. It wasn't me. It wasn't a sympathetic family member coming to hear her side of the story. It was 2 detectives from the San Diego County Financial Crimes Division, specifically assigned to the Elder Abuse Unit. Because I had filed the initial fraud report with the bank while my father was still legally alive, and because Mr. Sterling had submitted the certified trust documents proving Elena had absolutely no legal authority over the estate, the bank's internal investigation team had automatically turned the entire IP log and transaction history over to the authorities. I didn't have to press charges. The state of California pressed them for me. Elena was formally indicted for felony attempted wire fraud and elder financial abuse. The smug, confident woman who had paraded an expensive Los Angeles lawyer into a funeral to throw me out onto the street was suddenly facing the very real, terrifying possibility of state prison. To keep herself out of a cell, she had to hire a specialized criminal defense attorney. The required retainer was $30,000 in cash. Mark, her husband, finally waking up from a decade-long coma to see the staggering reality of who he had married, refused to liquidate his own $401k to pay for her defense. He realized the pool deposit was gone. He realized the inheritance was a lie. He realized his entire financial future was tied to a woman who had tried to rob a dying man. He packed his bags that same weekend. He took the kids, moved into his mother's house, and immediately filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and extreme financial recklessness. He petitioned for full custody using her pending felony indictment as the primary exhibit. Without Mark's stable income, and with her own bank accounts completely frozen by the ongoing criminal investigation, the financial dominoes fell rapidly. The luxury pool contractor, who had already broken ground and destroyed her backyard, placed a mechanic's lien on her home for the unpaid $45,000 balance. By the end of the year, the house went into foreclosure. Elena had tried to steal a $1.2 million estate, and in doing so, she lost her marriage, her home, her social standing, and her freedom. She ended up taking a humiliating plea deal that kept her out of a prison cell, but permanently branded her as a convicted felon. Today, the former masterpiece of our family is working a minimum wage retail job, the only place in her zip code that would hire someone with a severe fraud conviction on their public record. The extended family, who had once orbited around her drama, completely cut her off. Aunt Martha called me once, her voice thick with embarrassment, to apologize for ever doubting me. I accepted her apology, but I didn't invite her back into my life. The museum was close to everyone. The San Diego house, the beautiful mid-century property overlooking the canyon where I had spent 8 agonizing months acting as a hospice nurse, sold in early April for slightly over its asking price. The trust, functioning exactly as the impenetrable fortress Mr. Sterling and my father had designed it to be, cleanly dispersed the funds directly into my private accounts. There was no probate court. There were no contested hearings. It was silent, efficient, and perfectly legal. I packed my boxes, loaded my dog into the passenger seat of my car, and drove north. I bought a quiet, secluded cabin in the Pacific Northwest, surrounded by towering pine trees and absolute, unshakable peace. If you had asked me a year ago, before the cancer diagnosis and the legal battles, what my ultimate goal was, I would have said it was to finally make my sister understand my value. I thought if I just worked hard enough, if I managed the background perfectly, she would eventually turn around and appreciate the climate control system. What do I know now that I didn't know before this happened? I know that you cannot demand respect from a person who relies on your subjugation to feel powerful. I used to think revenge meant screaming at someone until they finally admitted they were wrong. I was wrong. True victory is completely removing their access to your life and letting their own toxic mechanics destroy them in a vacuum. I don't wait for apologies anymore. I don't try to keep the peace in a house that was built for war. I simply check the locks, file the paperwork, and build my own life somewhere they can never reach. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep a narcissist warm. So what do you think? Did I go too far or not far enough? Let me know in the comments below.